Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I am your host, Jordan Jones, here today for the 10th episode of Boilers and Beyond. Thank you to everyone who's listened to the show up to this point. I'm really excited for what the next 10 episodes are going to be like and what the future is going to be like here on this program. I think we have a really good episode coming up here today. We've been in this cycle lately where we get 1 week with a lot of news, then a couple weeks in a row with very little new content to talk about. So, a few weeks ago, we took a look at the past and the future for Jeff Brohm and the Purdue football program. Today, Purdue basketball is in a much different position. We've got Coach Matt Painter preparing to enter his 16th year on the sideline of Mackey Arena. So we're going to take a look at what the future has in store for Purdue basketball and kind of how their past successes can help set up the future. Before that, though, let's touch on a few pieces of Purdue recruiting news from the past week. As we previewed a little bit on the show last week, 2022 four-star quarterback Brady Allen of Gibson Southern High School down in southern Indiana committed to Purdue on Wednesday. This was an expected decision, not much of a surprise to anyone on Twitter or in Purdue, in the inner Purdue circle. I talked more extensively about Brady Allen's skill set on the show last week, but I do believe this is the best quarterback commit Coach Jeff Brohm has received in his 5 recruiting classes at Purdue thus far. I am really excited to see what he can do. He is the first commit for the 2022 class, getting Purdue off to a nice start. Anytime you can pick up a 4-star, especially at one of the positions that your program and coaching staff is known for being strong with, that's a really good start to a recruiting class, especially getting Allen on board before his junior season even kicks off. Really good pickup there for Jeff Brohm and Purdue. Then we saw on Saturday the opposite happen. In the 2021 class, 3-star athlete Brian Threats from Dublin, Ohio, decommitted from Purdue. He had committed back in early April as a running back to the Purdue program. Look, this is predictable. These early commitments that were all taking place back from mid-March to mid-May, there were a ton of them. And, anytime these guys commit during a worldwide pandemic, it's fairly easy to predict that, you're going to have quite a few jump ship and, really just go look to play other programs because these decisions are rushed. In a time of uncertainty, guys want to hop on and make sure their name is, solid somewhere. But, Threats decides to decommit. His offer list spans both some Power 5 and Group of 5 programs. Good list, though. A lot of offers for Threats. I did think he was going to be a nice addition to Purdue's 2021 class. The word athlete describes him really well. Does a lot of good things on both sides of the ball. He was going to play running back, but, as we've seen with some of these athletes before, just because they're initially supposed to play one side of the ball doesn't mean that's how they're necessarily going to end up. I thought he was going to be a good addition, but, this is part of the recruiting game. This happens. He's far from the first player to decommit from Purdue, and he's not going to be the last. This does leave the 2021 Purdue football recruiting class with only 8 commitments. That is the lowest number in the Big Ten. Whether that is cause for panic or not is probably in the eyes of the beholder. I do think that Purdue would like to have more at this time, especially because, you're starting to see some uncertainty as to whether high school football will be played this fall. I think the more commitments you have now, the better you can feel about your class. But, there's still a lot of big names on the board for Purdue. We're seeing, I believe, August 1st, Josh Sales, a 3-star offensive tackle from Brownsburg High School, is going to make his decision between Indiana, Purdue, and Arizona State. I do think Indiana probably has the edge there right now, but there's different ways that could go. It wouldn't be the most surprising thing ever to see him go another way, but 24/7 Sports' Steve Wilfong has Sales committing to Indiana. Steve Wiltfong isn't wrong very much. I'll just leave it at that. Then finally, one piece of basketball recruiting information. This isn't really news, but Harrison Ingram, the 5-star 2021 wing from Dallas, Texas, who Purdue is very much in on, he'd recently received an offer from Howard University. In an interview with Stock Risers, he discussed that his family has HBCU connections and that that's something he'd be interested in pursuing and continuing his family's legacy there. Look, everything I hear about this recruitment right now, I don't see this ending well for Purdue. Duke and Kentucky have begun to express some interest, particularly Duke. If they were to offer, I'd really probably say there's zero chance Ingram comes to Purdue. I just think the longer this goes and the more schools come into the mix, I think that looks bad for both Purdue and Stanford, who were at one point considered to be the two leaders. If those were the options Ingram wanted to go with, I don't think you would see new schools coming on the board. But, we'll see. There's a lot of time left in this recruitment. But if you're a Purdue fan listening and have been really set that Harrison Ingram is going to become a Boilermaker, I would start to at least prepare yourself for the possibility that does not happen. That's all for news. So, again, not much happening this week. We'll dive into today's topic, and that is the future of Purdue basketball under Matt Painter. We connected the Purdue football future with Jeff Brom. We'll do the same with Purdue basketball and Matt Painter. And look, we're 15 years into the Matt Painter era, and I really don't think you could have possibly asked for a better transition from Gene Cady to whoever the next coach would be. Obviously, it's Matt Painter, but I just don't think, when you have a coach-in-waiting situation for a young coach in his mid-30s, this was better than any possible outcome, in my opinion. Painter is already 8th in total wins in Big Ten history. He's made 11 NCAA tournament appearances, all of those within the last 14 years. That's 8th most in the country in that time. And, if you look at his time at Purdue, it's been fairly dominant. From 2006, the 06-07 season, to the 11-12 season, Purdue made the tournament every year, got to a couple Sweet 16s in there, and they had no first-round exits. That's tough to do. They won a game in every tournament. Obviously, you had some, the 2010 and 2011 tournaments were a little bit disappointing with Robbie Hummel getting hurt in February, right before the 2010 tournament, and Purdue running into a buzzsaw in VCU in the second round in 2011. But, all things considered, a heck of a run for Purdue. Some Big Ten titles in there in the 09 Big Ten tournament and the 10 regular season. And then it went from there. That 2011-12 season, you had Robbie Hummel as a fifth-year senior. The team hung on, made a tournament, gave Kansas all they could handle. And then the program went downhill for 2 years, and it went downhill very fast with the 2012 season, kicking off with a loss to Bucknell in Mackey Arena. Both of these years, Purdue went under 500 in 12-13 and 13-14. The latter of those two seasons, Purdue finished dead last in the Big Ten. And Matt Painter at that point, admits his faults, basically says, I haven't been recruiting the type of players that we need at Purdue. Purdue was not a good shooting team at that point. Purdue was not playing hard on defense. Purdue was not recognizable to the brand of basketball that Gene Cady and now Matt Painter has committed to Purdue playing. Then he brings in a class with P.J. Thompson, Dakota Mathias, Vincent Edwards, Isaac Haas, and begins a stretch of 5 straight NCAA tournaments. They had back-to-back first-round exits in the tournament. as an 8-9 game to Cincinnati in 2015, followed by the unfortunate loss to Little Rock in the 2016 first round, where Chris Beard really made a name for himself. But follows that up, gets to 3 straight Sweet 16s in 2019, finally breaks through, gets to an Elite Eight. We don't need to go further in what happened in that game. Purdue probably wouldn't have made the tournament in 2020. They'd have really needed a nice Big Ten tournament in Indianapolis to get there. I don't think it was likely, but, you can grant Purdue a little bit of a waiver from this year because the tournament didn't happen. The NCAA ruled that, with that, all the streaks remain intact. So Purdue's made 5 straight NCAA tournaments going into this next year. And as we look back at Matt Painter's first 15 years, when has Purdue been at its best? What can Purdue look back on and try to make the future look like? And I think the biggest and best description of how Purdue won games in their couple of really good stretches is that Purdue would combine shot creators on the outside with a strong inside presence. You've had shot creators. You've had Etuan Moore, Robbie Hummel, Vincent Edwards, and Carson Edwards. Those guys really stand out. They could do a lot of things with the ball in their hands. It's very common in Purdue's motion offense that, you have players running off screens and getting open shots without the ball in their hands. But Purdue is at its best when their guards are able to put the ball on the floor, penetrate, even just a couple dribble move and a pull-up jump shot. That's when Purdue's at its best. That's what made Robbie Hummel so good. Etuan Moore was able to do it. Vincent Edwards could use his size to really use that and go from the three-point line into the paint very effectively and score. And obviously Carson Edwards did whatever he wanted. But that inside presence to counteract that, you look at guys like Jawan Johnson, A.J. Hammonds, Caleb Swanigan, Isaac Haas. Purdue's had big bodies down low that can get buckets. And that really opens up Purdue's offense for those motion action three-point shots. Purdue's had guards who can play defense. You look at Chris Kramer, Rayfel Davis, and even the much maligned Nojel Eastern. These guys were dogs on defense who weren't letting opposing players have big games against them. And that's how Purdue was so successful in the Big Ten in so many of these seasons. You could neutralize a top guard from the other team, and, Purdue was able to use their strengths on offense to a way where they didn't really get counteracted too much. And then Purdue's also had some flat-out shooters on the floor. Ryan Smith, Dakota Mathias, Ryan Klein. These guys have really just been role players for Purdue who have been really, really good. And it might be a stretch to call Mathias and Klein role players, but, especially with Ryan Klein up until his senior year, that's all he was. But if you combine all these aspects, these good guys on the outside who can create for themselves, these strong players on the inside, strong defense, and guys who can knock down jump shots off a screen, that's when you have Purdue teams that compete for Big Ten championships, that get to the Sweet 16. That's where, Purdue wants to be in the future, and that's how Matt Painter tries to recruit. It's difficult to combine all those aspects. That's why when you look at some of these teams, they're always mentioned as one of Purdue's best ever. But I think the biggest key is that Purdue has been at its worst under Matt Painter when they don't have shooters on the outside. You look at that stretch from 2012 to 14, Purdue didn't have shooters. Ronnie Johnson, Tyrone Johnson couldn't shoot. Anthony Johnson couldn't shoot. They also had terrible big man play at that time, but their lack of shooting was just astonishing. And this past season, Purdue didn't shoot all that well either. Sasha Stefanovic was a good shooter. I think Eric Hunter's a good shooter. That's all they had. Isaiah Thompson was able to knock down some shots, but nothing was consistent for Purdue this past year, especially when they went away from Mackey Arena. But, Purdue also needs players who can create with the ball. And as we get into previewing the roster a little bit, that's going to be a key, is how can Purdue better create with the ball, better improvise out of that motion offense to get buckets even when your main target coming off a screen isn't wide open for a jump shot. Purdue's team this upcoming year, the 2020-21 Boilermakers, are going to be interesting because there are no seniors on this roster. Purdue has a ton of room for these players to grow and improve over the next 2 years. This is a long-term game for Purdue. But you look at these guards. I do think Eric Hunter is really going to have a nice couple years to finish up his career. He showed a huge step from his freshman to sophomore year. And even we saw it a little bit with his shooting off the dribble in the mid-range. That's probably what stood out to me the most because, Eric Hunter is a smaller guard. He's not going to get in the paint and really do a ton. He can get to the basket, but, he's going to be an outside shooter. And if he can continue to knock down mid-range jump shots the way he did, he's going to be a really, really effective piece for Purdue. I did think Isaiah Thompson came in and he was better than I expected as a freshman. Yes, he's undersized. He's not going to get taller. That's okay. Isaiah Thompson's a good player for Purdue. He was strong on defense last year. He didn't back down from anyone. Yeah, there were moments where he got burned a little bit. That's a freshman in the Big Ten. That happens no matter who you are. But, he really had a nice year. He shoots the ball well from outside. He had a little bit of a mid-range game that was pretty impressive. Had some floaters that went down, mid-range pull-ups that went down. I really think Isaiah Thompson is a guy with a nice, bright future for Purdue. Sasha Stefanovic, another guy who really improved from his freshman to sophomore year, but also you're going to want to see make another step. He knocked down three-pointers more consistently this past year. He was more consistent at the free throw line, and he was better on defense. With that being said, he still needs to improve on defense. His three-point shooting at Mackey Arena was phenomenal. His three-point shooting on the road was not so great. We'll see how much better that gets next year. I do believe it will. Sasha's going to be a hardworking guy. I do believe strongly in him as a player at Purdue. And then we have 3 freshmen coming in for Purdue this year that, have a lot of potential. You have Jaden Ivey and Ethan Morton as true freshmen, and you have Brandon Newman coming in off of a redshirt season. Ivey's going to be a really good multi-level scorer for Purdue. This was a great commitment for Purdue. They got him very early in the spring of Ivey's junior year of high school. An early commitment that Purdue locked in on. Heck of a player, and one thing that's really encouraging for Purdue is, the pedigree of a basketball family he comes from. His mom, Niele Ivey, now the head coach of the Notre Dame women's program, former assistant for the Memphis Grizzlies. Ivey's going to be a really, really good piece for Purdue. I'm excited to see him score as a freshman. I do believe that's what his role is going to look like. Brandon Newman is another guy I'm excited for. He was runner-up in Mr. Basketball when he was a senior at Valparaiso High School. He's a great three-point shooter. All you hear this offseason is Purdue players talking about how strong of a three-point shooter Brandon Newman is. Travion Williams went on the record saying that, Newman's going to be one of the best three-point shooters in the conference this year. I don't know much about his mid-range game. I don't know that he had to use a mid-range game much in high school, but I think a redshirt year is where you're going to really see some development out of him. Newman is going to be a good defensive player for Purdue. All around, Ivey and Newman are going to be really good off-the-ball guards for Purdue. Then you come into Ethan Morton, who probably is not going to put up a lot of points right away. I don't know that that's his ideal role for Purdue right now, but he's going to be a facilitator. He's going to distribute the basketball, and he's really going to get stuff done for Purdue. He's a guy who is going to make his teammates around him better. And I don't know that Purdue really had that last year. But I think Morton is going to be better at setting up players to knock down shots than anyone on Purdue's roster. I think that's where Ethan Morton's going to get a lot of playing time as a freshman. Purdue's done a really good job at recruiting the guard spot. Last year hurt Purdue a little bit. Purdue struggled. That's also what happens when you lose a guy like Carson Edwards and you lose a guy like Ryan Klein. That's a tough backcourt combination to lose, especially when you combine that with No-Gel Eastern taking a major step backward as the most experienced returning guard. You know, as I said already, all of these players have 2 years of eligibility left or more. You look at these 3 freshmen who have 4 years of eligibility left. The future is going to be pretty bright in that Purdue backcourt, especially with those 3 freshmen who have a lot of room to grow. Really optimistic about what that group has, and that optimism, you know, runs into a little bit of a wall here when we talk about the wings. And when I talk about the wings, I'm looking at the 4 position. Aaron Wheeler was pretty encouraging as a freshman. He's a freak athlete. He knocked down some 3-pointers as a freshman that made you really excited about what he was going to do as a sophomore. Had a great exhibition game against Southern Indiana, and then that was his peak for the season. Only shot 21% from 3 in his sophomore season, 26% total from the field. That's rough. That's really rough. And you know, 3 of those made 3-pointers were in a game at Assembly Hall. Outside of that game, he really, really struggled. I do expect a bounce-back year from Aaron Wheeler this year. Purdue has too much good coaching in that locker room. That coaching staff is just too good at working with shooters for him to stay down. I'm optimistic that Wheeler is going to bounce back, but, you know, last year does cause for some trepidation there. And then you get Mason Gillis coming off his redshirt season. Gillis is a really talented player, and I'm excited for what he can do for Purdue. He's going to be a little rusty, though. Gillis sat out his senior year of high school at Newcastle with a knee injury. So, you know, his last year at Newcastle, he spent watching from the sidelines. Then last year, he redshirts. So, you know, you're looking at almost 2.5 years since he's taken the floor in a real game by the time this November rolls around. In high school, he needed some improvement on the perimeter shooting. But, you know, again, 2 seasons without playing a game, 1 season as a redshirt at Purdue, you know he was working that aspect of his game. He's going to be a good rebounder. He's a physical guy. And he's just very different from Aaron Wheeler at that position because Gillis is so much more physical, whereas Wheeler's a little bit more of an outside player, even though he's got 2 inches on Mason Gillis. This is going to be a huge, huge spot for Purdue over the next 2 years. If Purdue can be getting 40 good minutes a game out of their 4 position, Purdue's going to be in really, really good shape. If this is an area where Purdue struggles this year, you know, I think you're going to start seeing a little bit of frustration boiling over. And that's normal to happen. Very rarely do you look at a team without any flaws. But this is a really key spot for Purdue to avoid flaws next year because I do think there's going to be some flaws here as we get into the big men. Travion Williams is your only known commodity. He needs to be able to play a ton of minutes for Purdue this year. And I mean pushing 30 minutes a game. He's made incredible strides with his conditioning. That really deserves a lot of credit. He came in weighing over 300 pounds. He's now down into about the 260, 270 range, I believe. Williams has worked his butt off to become an effective player at Purdue. Major props to him. And as long as he continues to do that and stay in shape, you know, I think good things are really going to come to Travion Williams. I think this is a year where, you know, with him getting close to 30 minutes a game ideally, you're going to see him push, 15 points a game, maybe in the upper teens points a game. He's going to be a key for Purdue this year. He has to be able to stay on the floor. Defense has not been known to be Travion Williams' strong point. It needs to be. Not only does he just need to be, he doesn't even need to be the strongest defender Purdue's had at big man, but he can't struggle on defense too much, because if he gets in foul trouble, your other options are Emmanuel Duana and Zach Edey. These guys haven't proven very much. In my opinion, Edey was going to be a clear redshirt prior to Matt Harms' transfer. He's only played basketball for 4 years. I know a lot of Purdue fans were excited with his time at IMG, but, look a little bit more into that. Edey didn't play a ton for IMG this past year. I think he has the potential to be a good player at Purdue. I don't think that's going to happen right away at Purdue. It's going to take some time to develop him. And Emmanuel Duana on the other side, he's another guy who came in as a developmental project, and so far we haven't seen a lot of development yet. Even in the garbage time Emmanuel Duana played last year, he looked a little bit out of place. He struggled some. I vividly remember Purdue against Jacksonville State, where Emmanuel Duana picked up 3 fouls in maybe 90 seconds. And he just looked really uncomfortable on all those. They weren't natural basketball fouls even. He just looked really, really out of place. Looking at the Zach Edey and Emmanuel Duana playing the backup 5 this year, that's why I think that, these population of the Purdue fan base that thinks that Purdue's going to be better without Matt Harms this year, they're out of their minds. I just don't get that. I know Matt Harms had a disappointing junior year, but he's a known commodity. He is a solid contributor. Purdue losing him was not good. You can make the argument that Nojel Eastern's departure is going to make Purdue better. Don't know that that's fully true. There's definitely some truth to it. Matt Harms leaving Purdue does not make Purdue a better team. I maintain that very strongly. Duana and Edey both have their work cut out for them. Not only to get on the floor this year, but when Caleb First gets to campus in the fall of 2021, Caleb First is really going to push those guys for minutes. First is going to be a stud. Really strong player here at Fort Wayne Blackhawk, up in my neck of the woods in the state. But he's a guy who can play inside and outside a little bit. He can be a small ball 5, and he can be a big 4. He's versatile. I think he's going to put on some weight when he gets to Purdue. He'll hang down low a little bit better when he has some more weight, especially in the upper body. But he's going to be a guy with a really bright future at Purdue. I think Caleb First, getting him to commit back in February was huge, a huge start to the 2021 class. And here, as we get into the questions from the audience, we'll talk a little bit more about what that group could look like. But as a whole, man, Purdue's going to continue to play a challenging out-of-conference schedule. That's not going to change. The Big Ten's going to remain a top 3 conference in the nation. They're going to be right there with the Big 12 and the ACC. And as we go to the future, I think Matt Painter is going to make a Final Four at Purdue. He's been so close a couple times. He's a great coach. Purdue's going to get to a Final Four eventually under Matt Painter. Whether it's with these current players or not, I don't know. But Matt Painter's got a lot of time left at Purdue. There's a lot to be excited about as we go to the future. And, we'll get into some questions from the audience now. And we'll start off with Larry Ceshak on Twitter asking who the current top recruiting targets are. As we look at the 2021 class, Purdue only has one scholarship left. One is being used on Caleb First, obviously. The other, you're looking at Harrison Ingram, who I mentioned in the open, Trey Kaufman, a 4-star forward out of Silver Creek High School down in Sellersburg, Indiana, and Blake Wesley, a 4-star guard from South Bend Riley High School. Ideally, Purdue gets one of those 3. I think Kaufman and Wesley are much more likely than Ingram is at this point. I do think Purdue's going to get one of those three, and in my opinion, I think Kaufman could be a really interesting player. To add him and First together, that could be an interesting combination that, really elevates Purdue's big man game, might solve a little bit of the weaknesses that exist right now with Edey and Duwana. I'm excited to see what's going to happen with First, and I think Kaufman is, in my opinion, the most likely of those three players to come to Purdue. In 2022, we've gotten to the point now where that class is a conversation piece. There's 4 open spots. That's a lot of spots to fill because the state of Indiana's class is a little bit weaker that year. However, my favorite target that Purdue has an offer out to right now is Jalen Washington, 4-star forward up from Gary Westside High School. I believe Purdue offered him either in 8th grade or as a freshman in high school, but everything I hear about him is good. He is coming off a torn ACL, but assuming he bounces back well from that, I'd love to see Purdue land him and think he could do some really good things at Purdue. More questions from the audience. We've got a lot today. Thank you all for chiming in on Twitter. We'll answer everything you guys have. Joe chimes in asking, how many days since IU has beaten Purdue in men's basketball? Joe, it's been 1,613 days since Indiana beat Purdue in men's basketball. It'll be over 1,700 by the time they play again, presumably in January or February. Purdue has dominated that rivalry recently, and you see it at the IU level. IU fans are not all that happy with Archie Miller's progress. A big part of that is the fact that Archie Miller is 0-5 against Matt Painter thus far. Nate on Twitter, who is the best player in the Big Ten this upcoming year? This is a tough one because of the NBA draft withdrawal deadline not having passed yet. If Luka Garza returns to Iowa, it's him, and I don't think it's all that close. If Garza returns to Iowa, I think he would be my pick for preseason National Player of the Year. If he doesn't return and he stays in the NBA draft, I think you look over to Champaign at Kofi Cockburn and Ayo Dosunmu. Both of those players, again, have their names in the NBA draft pool right now. But if they come back, those guys are going to be preseason all Big Ten players. And if none of the above, if Garza, Cockburn, and Dosunmu all leave, I think it's tough. You have to look at some guys who, need to take a step this year. But some names like Aaron Henry, Trace Jackson Davis, Geo Baker, maybe Isaiah Livers, those are some names that stand out to me. But we can really have a better answer to this question, Nate, once the NBA draft deadline passes and we know who's going to be back in the Big Ten this season. The Paint Crew on Twitter, thank you for the question, the Paint Crew. Which freshmen are you most excited for this year, including the red shirts? That's a really tough question. That's a good question. I'm excited to see a lot of these guys. Mason Gillis being back on the court for the first time in a few years is going to be fun to see. I was really excited about him as a commit. Disappointing to see him not get his senior season at Newcastle in. But seeing him back on the court is going to be fun. Ivy is going to be a guy who can score immediately. I think Jaden Ivey is probably the best scorer Purdue has recruited since Carson Edwards or maybe Etuan Moore. Just looking at what they were as a recruit, I think Ivy is probably more on line with Etuan Moore than Carson Edwards as a recruit. Obviously, Edwards' development at Purdue was special and deserves a lot of credit that probably doesn't get given enough. I'm excited for Newman with everything I hear about his shooting ability, but overall, I would say the freshman I'm most excited for is Ethan Morton. His abilities are just so uncommon for a freshman. His abilities as a facilitator, as a point guard at 6'6", who's going to see the floor and really be able to distribute the basketball well. You don't see that much as a freshman. The rarity of his of a player of his skill set and caliber is why I would go with Ethan Morton as the freshman I'm most excited for. Great question, though, and I do think really you could pick any of those guys and, be in very good shape with justifying your answer. Production JJSW on Twitter asks, would you rather never lose to IU again or win a national championship this year? Purdue needs to win a national championship. That is priority number one. I think every Purdue fan would pick winning a national championship. And look, part of what makes rivalries special is when you lose that game. I know Purdue hasn't experienced it since 2016 now, but the rivalry wouldn't be as special as it was if, Purdue never lost to IU. That's what makes this rivalry special. It's the best basketball rivalry in the best basketball state. It's special because of how strong both programs have been historically. Definitely, though, Purdue winning a national championship would be ideal for, I think, every Purdue fan on the planet. Riggs has multiple questions for us on Twitter. The first question is, how much will the team free throw percentage increase without Nogel Eastern on the roster? It's interesting. Nogel Eastern probably is the worst free throw shooter in Purdue history, just based on how he never got better, really. He solved his problems his sophomore year and then started off brutally bad as a junior. But he only took 33 free throws last year. That's not something that necessarily kills the team free throw percentage. Purdue is really going to need Travion Williams to improve at the foul line. He led the team in attempts, took over 90 free throws last year, made 48% of those. That's got to improve. If you're going to look at Purdue improving their record, Williams is going to be on the floor a lot. He's going to get fouled a ton down low. That number needs to go from 48% to at least north of 60%. The closer you can get to 70, that's going to help Purdue a ton. The freshmen are also going to take a lot of free throws, just based on the nature that, realistically, as many as 5 freshmen could be getting serious minutes this year. There are no guarantees when you have freshmen in big pressure situations like pressure-packed free throws at the end of a close Big Ten game. There's no guarantees there at all. And overall, in general, Purdue just needs to get to the foul line more. Purdue only took 14.7 free throws a game last year. That was good for 12th in the Big Ten. Purdue needs to get to the line more and convert more. They weren't awful at the line last year. They were 9th in the Big Ten in free throw percentage. That's better than it felt at times. But Purdue just needs to get to the line more and convert more when they're there. More questions from Riggs. Asks, who can we expect to be Purdue's best offensive player? He guesses Travion Williams, and Riggs, I'm with you there. I agree that Travion Williams is going to be Purdue's best offensive player. There's just too many opportunities in the Matt Painter offense for the big man to put up good numbers. And, Williams is a good player, led the team in scoring last year. He's going to have so many opportunities to score this year, especially, too, when you look at his strength as an offensive rebounder. He's going to give himself even more opportunities there. I think he's going to have a good year for Purdue this year. He asks, compared to the rest of the Big Ten, could we see Purdue sneak into the top 5? Kind of like Nate's question of who the best player in the conference is going to be. Riggs, tweet this back at me after the August 3rd NBA draft withdrawal deadline, and I'll have a better answer to that question because Iowa and Illinois, their outlooks are entirely different if Garza stays or goes, or if Coburn and Dosunmu stay in Champaign or go to the draft. Once we have more clarity there, I can get you a better answer for that. And finally, he ends with, how great is Matt Painter? Matt Painter's an excellent coach. I said at the start, you could not have asked for a better transition away from Gene Cady into a new coach than what Purdue got when Matt Painter became the head coach. He's just a fantastic, fantastic basketball mind and I do believe Purdue's very, very lucky to have him. The rest of these questions are all non-sports related. Keep listening if you'd like, but we are done with sports for the podcast today. Mackie Maniacs on Twitter asking, you got to choose one. Marry, kill, and a one-night stand between Bud Light, Miller Lite, and Coors Light. I would marry Bud Light every day of the week. One night with Miller Lite and kill Coors Light. There's my answer there. Adam chimes in with some more beer talk on Twitter. One beer for the rest of your life between Miller Lite, Busch Light, and Coors Light. Which is it? Definitely Miller Lite out of those three. Not too much of a competition there. Dan on Twitter asks, how much money should I put on Trump plus 150 to win the election in November? This is not a political podcast. We stick to sports on this show, along with a little bit of beer talk, but we stick to sports. If you want a political podcast, go find a political podcast, but we're going to talk sports here. And then Brian rounds out the questions with, who would win in a fight to the death, a full-grown bear or a gorilla? Weapons can be utilized if applicable. I think Brian might have had one too many Oakhart rum and Diet Cokes last night. Odd question there. I'll never get a bet against a bear, though, just out of support for my Chicago Bears. I'll go with the bear there. As always, please feel free to tweet your questions before every episode. We will answer as many of them as we can. I do love the audience engagement. I appreciate hearing from you guys, and please continue to reach out. But that's all I have for this week's show. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Make sure to subscribe. Boilers and Beyond is available wherever you get your podcasts. The show's also on Twitter. Get it on the mailbag questions. Follow us at Boilers Beyond. And let me know what you thought of this week's episode. We'll be back next Tuesday for more of the biggest news and high-level analysis of Purdue athletics. Be sure to tune in. Until then, stay safe.